My name is Olivia. I'm 40 years old. I've been married to my husband, Michael, who is the same age as me and was my colleague at work for 10 years now. I'm currently in a different branch from my husband, but we used to be in the same department. He is a man of strong responsibility, admired by his subordinates. He has a bit of a show-off side and doesn't seem to want to show his weaknesses to others. He was a very masculine man, full of confidence and ambition. His work performance is well regarded by his superiors, and he is expected to be promoted without any problems. On the other hand, I'm quite the low-key type who doesn't stand out much. Given our opposite personalities, I was honestly surprised when he made a passionate approach to me. After dating for 2 years, he proposed to me with a large bouquet of roses. I had never been loved so much by a man before, so I immediately agreed. I was very excited about the wonderful days that lay ahead of me. However, what awaited me was living with my in-laws. I was going to decline because there was no prior discussion, but my husband was firm about living together. My parents are decent people, so it's going to be okay. He passionately explained how much my in-laws were looking forward to living with me, so I couldn't refuse in the end. And so, for the past 10 years, I have been living with my in-laws at my husband's home. Life there was something I could never have imagined when I first got married. Olivia, you forgot to clean the front door again, didn't you? Just as I finished making breakfast for everyone, my mother-in-law's nagging begins. It's a daily ritual. I'm sorry. Don't just apologize with words. Get it done right now if you understand. Even though I have to go to work, I'm treated like a servant from the morning. Ever since I started living with my in-laws, I've been forced to wake up at 5 a.m. every morning to make breakfast and clean. I wish she would do it herself since she's at home. Despite being a housewife and having time at home, my mother-in-law does not do any housework. I rush through my morning chores, go to work, and as soon as I get home, I start making dinner. By the time I go to bed, I'm so exhausted that I fall asleep instantly. This has been going on forever, and I often feel unwell due to exhaustion. I'm sure the cause is stress. I don't want the neighbors to think I'm slacking off, so make sure you clean properly. My mother-in-law is relaxing in the living room, eating the breakfast I made. You're gonna be late for work if you don't finish soon. Despite seeing all this, my husband has never stood up for me. My father-in-law also pretends not to see it, hiding behind his newspaper. Ever since I started living with my husband's family, I have been subjected to terrible mistreatment. Because of the stress, I've lost a lot of weight and look unhealthy. You're too skinny and unattractive. That's why you can't give birth to a child. I suddenly lost a lot of weight and my period stopped, making it impossible for me to have a child. Despite all of this being caused by my mother-in-law, I continue to be blamed for it. Before I got married, I was quite health conscious and paid good attention to my appearance. Now, there's hardly any trace of that left. I'm constantly depressed due to the stress from the continuous harassment from my mother-in-law and the shock of seeing my changed appearance in the mirror. I've become totally subservient to my mother-in-law. I've become so apathetic that I don't even feel like leaving this house anymore. Then, I received some devastating news. My father had suddenly passed away due to an accident. I hadn't been back to my family home in a long time because both my husband and my mother-in-law would berate me whenever I mentioned wanting to go there. Receiving the news of my father's death, I deeply regretted not spending more time with him. My family home is about an hour's drive from my in-laws' place, not too far. So I asked my husband and mother-in-law to come to my father's funeral. There's gonna be a funeral for my father. Oh, we're not going. Just let your family handle it. They cut me off before I could finish and said those words. I never thought they could be so heartless. With shoulders trembling with anger and grief, all I could reply was, "Understood." Many people gathered at my father's funeral. My father was self-employed and had a lot of connections. Everyone at the funeral was shedding tears, which showed how much he was loved. "Olivia, it's been a while. But what happened to you? You've lost so much weight." My mother, who I hadn't seen in a while, was shocked at my worn-out appearance. "Well, just a bit." "You're not sick, are you? I couldn't bear losing you too." My mother, thinking I was ill, started crying. Given her current mental state after my father's death, it wasn't surprising. I'm not sick, don't worry. I tried to calm my frantic mother and took a break in the waiting room. If you're not sick, then what's wrong? I thought back to my interactions with my husband and mother-in-law. Even when I told them about my father's death, they didn't say a word of comfort. Thinking about it made my anger bubble up, and I decided to tell my mother about my life at my in-laws' place. Actually, I've been subject to what you might call bullying by my mother-in-law. It's wearing me out. As I spoke, looking down, my mother peered into my face with a worried look. I'm relieved you're not sick, but this doesn't make me feel any better. Is that why you haven't been coming to see me? Yeah. As I nodded, my mother handed me a piece of paper. Take a look at this for yourself. Then think carefully about what to do next. When I looked at the paper my mother had given me, it turned out to be my father's will. My father, being a meticulous man, had left a will just in case something happened. It also mentioned inheritance. Inherit $2 million? That's what it says. You can decide how to use it. I was stunned by the large sum. At the same time, I began to hope that I could end my shared living situation. With this, I can build my own house and get out of my in-laws' place right away. Thanks to the inheritance my father left me, my life seemed to be getting brighter. I returned to my in-laws' home and was doing the household chores as usual. On the days when I have plans, the house tends to be messier than usual. This is probably inevitable since there's no one around to clean. While silently doing the chores, I was thinking about the $2 million I had inherited from my father. Despite my dislike for my mother-in-law, I wanted to stay with my husband, Michael. I decided to honestly discuss the large inheritance and suggest leaving the in-laws' home. There's something I want to talk about. After Michael's parents had gone to bed, I started the conversation when it was just the two of us. Talk? Yeah, about my father. Actually, I've come into an inheritance. Oh? How much? Well, it's $2 million. When I mentioned the amount, Michael was taken aback, perhaps because the figure was far beyond his expectations. Wait, what? That's right, $2 million. Upon grasping what I had said, Michael was overjoyed. He left you that much? That's generous. But about how to use this money, I was about to get to the main point, seeing Michael in a good mood. However, before I could speak, Michael suggested something outrageous. We need to transfer that money to my mom's bank account right away. I didn't understand what Michael meant. It was so absurd that I thought he was joking. No, why? I'm the one who inherited it, so that's not right. As I laughed and responded, Michael slammed the table angrily. What are you talking about? A wife's money belongs to her mother-in-law. It seemed that Michael did not realize he was saying something ridiculous. Seeing his serious expression, I felt scared. I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you're saying. All I wanted to do was suggest building a house for us to live together. But Michael didn't let me speak and tried to claim my inheritance for his mother. I couldn't sleep well that night due to the shock. The next day, while I was making breakfast, Michael and my mother-in-law approached me with angry expressions. Olivia, I heard about it. You inherited $2 million and you said you won't give it to me. Who do you think you are as daughter-in-law? My mother-in-law had already heard about the inheritance from Michael. But I'm the one who inherited it. Stop arguing and transfer it to my parents' account now. A daughter-in-law's money is our money. It seemed that they were determined to get the inheritance by any means. No matter how much I refused, they kept blaming me. As I fell silent, realizing my resistance was futile, Michael showed me a piece of paper. You're getting carried away because you've come into some money. I'm the one who's been supporting you. If you don't change your attitude, it's divorce. The paper was a divorce form. I've already signed it. Take this and go back to your parents' house. If you apologize properly, I might reconsider the divorce. I received the divorce form with Michael's part fully filled in. Staring at the divorce form, my past memories flashed back. I had never been financially supported in this house. I had been paying the same amount of living expenses as Michael, and all the household chores were my responsibility. I hadn't received any help or care. Despite that, they had always looked down on me. In the end, they were even trying to steal my father's money. If I stayed here, I might have felt so pressured that I would give them the inheritance. However, this money is what my father left for me. Being told to go back home, I actually saw it as an opportunity. Holding the already filled out divorce papers, I realized that the decision about my future was in my hands. I resolved to never give my father's inheritance, and I made a decision. I went back home after finishing work that day. I'm home! Welcome back. I had a feeling you would be back soon. My mother welcomed me with a warm smile, despite my exhaustion. My mother's home-cooked meals were laid out on the table. I couldn't remember the last time I ate a meal prepared by someone else. As I took a bite of the warm food, tears welled up in my eyes because of its deliciousness. Did you tell your husband about the inheritance? Yes, and it caused a fuss. I told my mother everything that my husband and my mother-in-law had said to me. At the shocking content, my mother was speechless. The inheritance is yours, and you decide your future. My mother comforted me gently as I cried. After being taken care of at my parents' home for a week, I decided to return to my in-laws' house. Well, I'm off. Take care. I wasn't afraid to go back to that house anymore. I headed back to my in-laws' house with a refreshed feeling. Finally back, huh? Have you reflected on your behavior? As soon as I returned to my in-laws' house, my husband and mother-in-law were waiting for me, arms crossed. Yes, I apologize. Please, let me live in this house again. I offered a superficial apology. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law grinned. Well then, hand over the inheritance quickly. Actually, the inheritance process is taking a while. I haven't received it yet. It's a complex process, so it might take another 6 months or so. Does it take that long? Well, fine. Both my mother-in-law and husband seemed satisfied, thinking I would hand over the inheritance obediently. However, they kept nagging about me going back to my parents' house for a week. Because you're not doing your duties as a wife, the house is a mess. Clean it up quickly. The in-laws' house was incredibly messy and unhygienic after just a week. It was almost impressive how they could make such a mess in a short time. Understood. The old me would have been deeply upset to see such a state. But now, I didn't care. No matter how much my mother-in-law bullied me or how hard the housework was, it didn't bother me at all. I did the housework as my mother-in-law ordered. It was my mother-in-law's birthday. I'll be going then. Make sure you keep the house clean. My mother-in-law always went on a trip for her birthday. Of course, I wasn't invited. By the way, have you received the inheritance yet? It's supposed to come in today. That's convenient. That $2 million is a present for Mom. Make sure to transfer it to Mom's account before we return. It's just too convenient that my mother-in-law's birthday coincides with the inheritance. My husband was unable to see through my lie. Without answering, I sent off the three of them with a smile, saying, "Take care." As soon as they were out of sight, I started executing my plan. I had been waiting for this day for a long time. They'll be quite surprised when they return from their trip, but that's no longer any of my concern. I quickly packed my things and left my husband's family home. Wow, this is amazing! I was moving my belongings into my new home. Actually, I had built a house with my father's inheritance. I'm so happy to be able to live in such a beautiful house. And I decided to live with my mother from my hometown. I'm truly happy that I don't have to worry about those people anymore. I sank into the plush sofa, feeling content. Today is a celebration of my new home with my mother. We invited a chef to our home and spent a luxurious day. The next evening, I received a call from my husband. What the hell is going on? He probably didn't understand the situation, as all my belongings were gone when he returned home. I won't be coming back there. Goodbye. I tried to hang up without wanting to talk to my husband, but my mother-in-law was yelling on the other side of the phone. What are you doing? Where are you now? I cannot tell you that. You told me to clean the house, so I tidied up my belongings. That's not a funny joke. Plus, you didn't transfer the inheritance. How many times do I have to tell you that the daughter-in-law's money is mine? Huh? I'm single, you know. When I answered that, my yelling mother-in-law suddenly became silent. Single? Well, I'm a divorcee. I was handed a divorce paper, so I submitted it. I'm a stranger to you now. Goodbye. I hung up the phone after saying that. I couldn't stop laughing, imagining my mother-in-law's stunned face on the other side of the phone. I feel very relieved to be unrelated to that family now. After that, I received numerous calls from my ex-husband. When I had some free time, I purposely picked up the phone and ignored the abuses from my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law. I thoroughly recorded all those calls. I decided to consult the police with those recordings. Harassment from an ex-husband is not uncommon. We'll give a warning before it gets dangerous. Thankfully, the police responded immediately and went to warn my ex-husband's family. For my ex-family-in-law who care about their public image, just having the police come would be enough damage. In addition, a subordinate of my ex-husband who lived in the neighborhood saw the police coming. My ex-husband was a prominent figure in the company, so the rumors spread quickly. Moreover, the colleagues and subordinates who didn't like my ex-husband started to spread bad rumors about him. Eventually, the rumor reached the department I belonged to. Did you hear that the police came? I'm divorced now, so I don't really know. What? You're divorced? Yeah, I was fed up with the abusive language from my mother-in-law and my husband. I spoke in a loud voice so that others could hear. The rumor-loving employees spread the rumor even more. It didn't take long for the rumor to reach my ex-husband's boss. You've been getting a lot of bad rumors. Huh? What are you talking about? I hate men who can't cherish their wives. Moreover, with such bad rumors circulating, it'll harm our reputation, so I've decided to transfer you. The transfer order given to my ex-husband was harsh. Wait, this place is... It was a branch office in the worst performing region. There's absolutely no entertainment around. It's a place you could call a landlocked island. You know what this means, right? Everything my ex-husband had built up to this point had collapsed, and there was no prospect of promotion in the future. Unable to refuse the transfer order, my ex-husband had to move to this rural area. As for my ex-mother-in-law, she was probably shocked that her son's reputation had dropped, and that she could no longer live with him. She ended up becoming a recluse, which led her to developing depression. There were also suspicions of dementia, as she often caused disturbances at home. My ex-father-in-law is desperately taking care of the drastically changed ex-mother-in-law. Even if there's no blood relation, a daughter-in-law is still an important family member. What happened to my former in-laws was simply karma for the harassment they continued to inflict upon me. Now, I'm living happily with my mother. We've even started gardening in our spacious yard. If I were still in that house, I would have never encountered this wonderful hobby. Having found a hobby has made me feel alive. My body, which was worn out from stress, is now healthy again. I'm so happy that I could cut ties with my former in-laws.
I'm sorry, I heard my husband was brought in. As I ran into the treatment room, the eyes of the doctors, nurses, and my husband were all on me. I wondered at the momentary silence, but when my eyes met my husband's, I was assured that he was safe and that his life was not in danger for the time being. But the next moment was outrageous. My name is Tanya. I'm a 30-year-old nurse. My husband, Steve, is 2 years older than me and a government employee. Unlike my previous boyfriends, I was attracted to him because of his seriousness. I don't know if it's because of my profession as a nurse or my nature, but I don't have a hard time serving others, and I am happy when people depend on me. Hence, helping out my boyfriend, lending him money, and such things were a daily occurrence. Even though I knew in my head that I shouldn't do it, I would do it when I was asked to. Many of my fellow nurses are like that, and relationships are always a topic of our conversations. But then, a turning point came for me. I met my husband at a blind date with fellow nurses. He seemed quiet and serious. He was the type of guy I had never been around before, and I was attracted to him from the start. Other girls said he looked too serious or plain, and there were no rivals. We exchanged contact information after a strong push from me. I was also the one who asked him to go out with me. The relationship lasted 3 years. It's been a smooth relationship with no conflict or betrayals. Many relationships break up after a few months, and it would have been better if the relationship had lasted a year, but with Steve it had lasted 3 years. I said to him, "Well, things are going to continue to go well. Shall we get married?" He proposed to me, and we got married. My husband had little dating experience, and his hobbies were reading and playing games at home. He was someone who rarely went out, but he was a bookworm and never ran out of topics to talk about. He is not a fan of the outdoors, but he seems to have a lot of gaming buddies, and we often play games while talking online. He says that since he started dating me, he has had more opportunities to go out. He was interested in it just because he didn't have anyone to go to, and he enjoys it wherever we go. My in-laws are a bit far away, about a 2-hour drive. I have the impression that my in-laws are gentle people. But Steve is the youngest of 3 siblings, and his in-laws are quite elderly, so we don't get to see them often. After meeting them at the wedding and the wedding ceremony, we only went to greet them once, at New Year's. We exchanged mid-year and year-end gifts, and I do call them, but I work nights, so our hours don't match, and I don't get a chance to talk to them very often. My husband and I go out somewhere when our days off coincide, and we do our share of the household chores. I thought we were doing well. However, it was about 3 months ago that I sensed something was wrong with my husband. When I came home after work, he was asleep on the sofa. A beer can was lying on the table. "You'll catch a cold," I said to him. He looked at me sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Isn't it unusual for you to be sleeping here and drinking beer?" I asked. "I was at an online drinking party with my gaming buddies. I was having too much fun and drank too much. I don't understand this world, but as long as my husband was having fun, I thought it was fine. But this was a mistake." After that, similar incidents continued, and one day when I saw my husband, I noticed that his hair had changed. "What's wrong with your hair?" He had never dyed his hair before, but now it was all done up and brown. "Is this hair okay at your job?" My husband is a government employee, and I thought he told me that the regulations are very strict. "What was wrong with it? I just thought recently that I should enjoy dressing up while I'm young. What do you think? Does it look good on me?" My husband was not a sophisticated man for his age, but he had suddenly changed, hadn't he? I'm not sure if it looks good on him or not, maybe because I'm not used to seeing it. But it doesn't look good on him. I didn't say it looked good on him. "Oh, I see," I simply replied. A few days later, he got his ears pierced. Again, I didn't think this looked good on him. Was he having a midlife crisis? I thought about that, but maybe he's having trouble with his job or something. "Hey, what's going on with you lately?" Unable to remain silent, I asked him straightforwardly, but he didn't give me a clear answer. "Nothing." And then my husband went to the bedroom. I knew I could not go on like this, but there was no one to fill in for the nurse who had retired not long ago, and I was so busy that I could no longer afford to pay attention to my husband. Around the time this was going on, Steve said, "My dad's not feeling well lately, so I'm going home for the weekend to check on him for a while." My father-in-law is old, and my husband must be worried about him. I nodded my head in agreement, and my husband began to leave the house every weekend. I tried to be considerate in my own way by cooking for him and texting him during work hours, but he rarely responded. Just when I thought it was time to have a proper discussion with him, I received an unbelievable call while I was at work. "Tanya, the police are trying to contact you." A colleague of mine called and passed the phone to me. "The police? Why?" I picked up the phone, feeling uneasy. He told me that Steve had been in an accident and had to be taken to the emergency room. What? What about my husband? Is he okay?" I was so upset that I questioned the police officer on the phone. He told me that he had heard it was not life-threatening and that he had been taken to our hospital where I worked. I rushed to the emergency ward. I asked the ward nurse where to find him and hurried to the treatment room. When I opened the door, I was met with the stares of the people there. "Excuse me, I heard my husband was brought in." The doctor looked doubtful, and the nurse's eyes swam. I felt uncomfortable, but when my eyes met my husband's, I was relieved. The nurse explained briefly. They said he had a leg injury that was so severe that they were going to cut his pants in order to treat him. When I looked at my husband again, his pants had already been cut off. Then, my husband, noticing my gaze, shouted, "Tanya, don't look at me!" What? I'm a nurse, and I wonder if my husband thinks it's embarrassing for me to see him have his pants cut off. Certainly that may be the case, But it's common sense to cut off clothing when you can't remove it normally due to injury. "Just get out of here!" my husband shouted. I stood there, not understanding what was going on. Even though my husband screamed, the hands of the doctors and nurses did not stop rushing to treat him. It was only natural. If I listened to every word they said, it might take too much time and stall the procedure. Suddenly, something extraordinary grabs my attention. "What is that?" I muttered to myself. On the inside of my husband's thigh was a tattoo. The injury being treated was on his left leg, while the tattoo was on his right leg. Fortunately, the right leg did not appear to be damaged, and the eye was drawn to the leg that had been injured. Scrawled onto the inside of my husband's thigh is someone's name. It seems to be a woman's name. Yasmin. Who? My husband continued to be shocked by my words, but I got out of there once the procedure continued. I talked to a fellow nurse in the emergency ward who told me that apparently my husband had not been brought in alone. She said she thought it was a couple who was married or dating because he was brought in with a woman his own age who had been in the accident with him. When he checked the name of the woman who was transported with him, her first name is Yasmin. It matches the name on the tattoo. Does this mean they were having an affair? I kept asking myself. My coworker said she had brown hair and pierced ears and also had a tattoo with his name on it. It didn't add up. I asked the nurse who treated the woman, and she told me that my husband's name was also tattooed on her inner thigh. I think it's safe to say they are having an affair. But what kind of a nerve does a woman have to have the name of her cheating partner tattooed on her body? I can only think that she must be unstable. As I was thinking this, I remembered the call from the police. The police first called my mother and father-in-law's house, but my in-laws cannot drive, so they asked where I worked and called me. This means that my in-laws must be worried. So I called their house, and my father-in-law answered, "Is Steve gonna be all right?" He was worried, so I told him that Steve had been in an accident and had been taken to the hospital, but was not in life-threatening condition. My father-in-law's voice told me he was clearly relieved. So I asked him, "By the way, Dad, have you been feeling better?" My father-in-law said he had no idea what I was talking about. I clarified, "Because Steve said you were not feeling well and he's been gone every weekend. He said he was taking care of you." I had no idea. It was all a lie. I was relieved to hear that my father-in-law was in good health and that there was nothing wrong with him during his recent medical checkup, but the problem was, where was my husband going? If it wasn't to my in-laws' house, then it must have been to the place where he was having the affair. But I had no proof. After finishing my working hours, I went home without seeing my husband, who was admitted overnight for treatment. I went home and began to go through my husband's belongings, thoroughly examining them. The evidence was easy to find. I found photos of him with this woman, hotel receipts, and even an email confirmation for reservations to a romantic resort. According to the schedule, they must have had this accident on the way home from the resort. The accident was a car crash on a mountain road. No one else was injured, and neither Steve nor this Yasmin woman appeared to be in life-threatening condition. However, since Steve had injured his leg, and it might be difficult for him to walk properly for a while, normally I should be worried about him as a wife, but I don't have that feeling anymore. I couldn't believe he lied about visiting his parents, saying he was worried about them, much less was lying to cover up an affair with another woman. I wondered if Steve's recent strange behavior, such as dyeing his hair and getting his ears pierced, was due to the influence of this woman. I told a fellow nurse and asked her to refer me to a lawyer who was good at divorce matters. The next day, I headed to the hospital room with my husband's belongings. My husband seemed to have hit his head and was so confused that he could not remember what had happened in the treatment room yesterday. Honestly, I didn't even care about the truth anymore. I left the hospital room without even having a conversation with him because I had a shift to get to. When I finished work, I went to see my lawyer and told him what happened. He told me that with that much evidence, I would have enough to sue. I just wanted to get a divorce as soon as possible. I couldn't have that man come out of the hospital and live in the same space. I felt so betrayed by my husband that my anger outweighed my sadness. From there, I found a new place to live and moved out on my own. Only my husband's belongings remain in the house. I planned to be patient until the day my husband was discharged from the hospital. I thought about divorcing him while he was in the hospital, but he is in the hospital where I work, so it would be troublesome if something happened to him there. Then we could get a divorce when he gets out of the hospital. I drove to pick my husband up from the hospital. I have to make a quick stop. Please come with me. He looked at me strangely, but nodded. I headed for a family restaurant near our house. When I entered the restaurant with my husband, the lawyer was waiting for us. My husband looked at me as if he didn't understand what was going on, but I guess he was tired of standing on a leg that was not fully healed yet. He sat down quietly, and I thrust the divorce papers at him. "Divorce? Why?" my husband shouted in a crazy voice. I seethed in my anger silently for a moment. "What do you mean, why? You had an affair. You even had your accident on your romantic trip. The evidence of your affair was found in our own home. What do you think you're doing? Besides, you lied about your father not feeling well. You lied about going to your parents' house to see this woman." My husband's face turned pale. "You think I am naive? Yasmin, the woman you were having an affair with, is out of the hospital. I heard that her injuries were less severe than yours. I can't believe she was brought to the hospital where I work." I smiled wryly, and my husband's face turned even paler. "You will pay for the anguish you've caused me." I handed him the divorce papers and a pen. My husband did not take the pen. "Is it only your leg that's injured, or have you lost the use of your hand as well?" I sarcastically said to him, and he finally picked up the pen. But he wouldn't sign. He only stared at the paper. "Why don't you sign it? Are you scared at the idea of starting over? You think this was just some game?" My husband froze, as if I had hit the nail on the head. I gave him a cold stare. "You're kidding, right? I can't be with my husband with the cheater's name tattooed right on his body." He looked at me in surprise. What? What are you talking about?" He may have been trying to deceive me, but I was unmoved. "You really don't remember? I was there when you were rushed to the emergency room. You were yelling at me not to look." Then my husband's face changed color. "Sound familiar? I saw the tattoo on the inside of your thigh, too. But what kind of a man tattoos his mistress's name on his body? Even if we didn't get divorced, do you think you can hide it from me?" My husband was slack-jawed. "No, it's not. That's not it," he said. I could only sigh at the sight of my husband. Dyed hair, pierced ears, and tattoos, and with the name of the person you cheated on your wife with? At least do it after you get divorced. While Steve was in the hospital, I actually met Yasmin face to face. I didn't go out of my way to see her or anything. We just bumped into one another. She was lost in the hospital, looking for the gift shop, and she asked me for directions. "The gift shop is just around the corner. Oh, and you're Yasmin, right?" "My husband is Steve," I said, as she checked my nameplate, turned pale, and left at a speed that was hard to believe for an injured person. "Please don't run in the hospital," I called after her. I think she was more embarrassed than I was. She probably heard from Steve that I worked here, but she probably never thought she would run into me at such a big hospital. Quite the stroke of luck. Seeing how my husband said he would rather start over with me than with someone he was supposedly loved enough to get a tattoo, I asked my Steve if he had been dumped by Yasmin. Steve didn't think I would ever find out, and apparently would rather suffer and stay married to me rather than have me file for alimony. I can't believe he thought he wouldn't get caught with her name tattooed on his body, and breaking up with him wouldn't erase the fact that he cheated on her, though. Nurses have a high rate of attracting the wrong kind of men. I'd been the same way, but when I married Steve, I thought he was a serious man and that he wouldn't betray me. And then he was stupid enough to get a tattoo of the person he cheated on me with, which is the worst thing ever. I'm so blind. I'll leave the rest to the attorneys, and I hope I never see him again." The lawyer looked at me and nodded. "I've moved out, so you'll have to get a cab or whatever to get home on your own. Bye." My husband looked at me with a pitiful face, his mouth agape. He would probably be crippled until his leg wound healed, but he deserved it. After that, I was divorced without incident. I also got alimony. Thanks to that, Steve was left broke and bankrupt. To his surprise, he found out that Yasmin was married to a colleague from his office, and they had actually found out by chance that he and her husband were online game buddies. Of course, Yasmin's husband filed a claim for alimony against her as well. I heard that Steve had to quit his job, and the rumors just keep on spreading. But I got the alimony paid, and I don't care if Steve quits his job or not. After the divorce was finalized, my former in-laws contacted me, but they were furious when I politely explained the situation. They apologized to me and said they would never let Steve hurt me again. This time, the word spread among my fellow nurses, but they all laughed it off, and I am still laughing my way through it. Now, I live alone, and I'm free to do whatever I want.
Help me, sis. My niece, Jenny, was about to burst into tears as she handed me something. It was just a picture of my brother, her father, with his colleagues at a bar. What's wrong, Jenny? Why the sudden distress? What are you two doing over there? As I was about to ask, my stern-faced sister-in-law interrupted us. I've been looking for you, Jenny. Come with me, she said, swiftly whisking Jenny away. Left alone, I casually flipped over the picture. To my surprise, on the back was a message from my brother. If anything happens to me, please protect my daughter. My name is Alice. I'm a 32-year-old working in the office of the construction company my family runs. My brother, 10 years my senior, was always hardworking and bore the weight of expectations as the heir to our family business. Everyone, including me, assumed he would take over the company. However, since he finished high school, disagreements with our father over management policies began to increase. My brother, it seemed, wasn't really interested in taking over the company, often saying, "I love being a carpenter, but that doesn't mean I want to inherit the business." I remember him repeating this like a mantra. Then he announced, "I've met someone I want to marry," and introduced us to a woman. Her name was Maggie. She had an outgoing personality and quickly bonded with our family, but she never lived with us. "I'm going to get married and leave this house." "Wait, aren't you going to take over the business, bro? You know I don't get along with Dad, right? I don't want to cause you any trouble." With those words, he gently stroked my head. True to his word, he married a few days later and left the house. Nevertheless, he always kept in touch with me and we chatted about trivial things. "Maggie's dinner was delicious today. She's a dietitian, so she always prepares meals considering my high blood pressure." Yeah, I've heard that story a million times. You never get tired of bragging, do you? As long as my brother was happy, that was all that mattered to me. Then, a few years after his marriage, Jenny was born. From then on, we started seeing my brother and his wife occasionally. They seemed blissfully happy, and Jenny was growing up healthily, loved by both parents. Around the time Jenny turned 10, there were talks within the family of mending ties with my brother. We all hoped to recreate the times when the family used to laugh together. However, that wish was not to be fulfilled. One day while I was at work, I received a rare call from my sister-in-law. While it wasn't unusual to get calls from my brother, it was strange to hear from her. Worried, I immediately picked up the phone. "Hello, sister-in-law?" "Oh, Alice." "What's up? It's rare to get a call from you." "Calm down and listen. Your brother, Jake, he fell from scaffolding at work and was taken to the hospital. He slipped because of the rain." The news was so sudden. I felt as if time had stopped. My mind went blank. Immediately, I called my parents, who were also at work, and we hurried to the hospital in the pouring rain. When we were led into the hospital room, we saw my brother, his skin pale. From the moment I saw him, the reality of the phone call hit me, and I collapsed onto the floor. "Bro?" The voice I managed to squeak out was so feeble that I startled myself, and a wave of sorrow washed over me. At the bedside, my brother's wife was bawling unabashedly like the heroine of a tragic tale. Her wailing was so intense that it made me hold back my tears and just stare at her, but I felt a strange unease about her behavior. Then Jenny, standing next to her, was looking down, her face pale, not shedding a tear but trembling as if she were terrified of something. "Jenny, are you okay?" It seemed like the shock of her father's death had made her unable to respond to my question. After the wake for my brother at our home, as the relatives were lost in their grief, I found myself quietly shedding tears in a deserted corner of the porch. The photo in the memorial portrait seemed to be a recent one. My brother looked a little worn out, but his expression was peaceful. I wonder if my brother lived a happy life. As I thought about this, an image of Jenny came to my mind. The last time we talked, my brother, who loved his daughter dearly, happily told me about how often he took her to amusement parks and zoos. Jenny must be struggling after losing her father. Thinking about my niece's feelings, I felt tears well up again, but then I heard a familiar voice calling out to me. "Sis." It was Jenny, her eyes brimming with tears. "Jenny, what's wrong?" I wiped my tears and asked her, trying to keep my composure. "Sis, help me. I think I might be next." "Eh?" As I was about to ask her to repeat what she had said, she handed me something while biting her lip. "Dad said if anything happens, I want you to give this to Alice." My brother said that? It was a brown envelope. It seemed a little worn, probably because she had been holding on to it for a while. "It's actually—" Just then, I heard a cold voice behind me saying, "What are you doing?" I was startled and turned around to see my brother's wife, Maggie, with a stern look on her face. "I've been looking for you." "Mama!" Maggie grabbed Jenny's arm and, before I could stop her, quickly whisked her away. Maggie had always been very friendly and kind, but she was behaving very differently now. It's natural given her husband just passed away, but Jenny's behavior was also a bit strange. Left behind, when I looked at what was inside the envelope, it was an ordinary photograph. It looked like it could have been taken at a social gathering. In it, my brother was smiling alongside several of his work colleagues. I decided to flip the photo over. On the back it read, "If anything happens to me, I want you to protect my daughter," in my brother's slightly angular handwriting. I was taken aback, speechless and just staring in surprise. I think Jenny was asking for help. This photo might be related. I decided to call a friend who was a police officer and arranged to meet him the next day. Normally, the funeral would have been conducted the day after the wake, but the crematorium was not available due to a certain day of the week, so we had a day off. This extra day allowed me to uncover the truth behind my brother's death. The next morning, when I arrived at our meeting place, he was already there waiting for me. "Sorry for calling you out of the blue." "Hey, don't worry about it. I was off duty. So what's up?" "Well, it's just that—" I began to tell my friend the sequence of events, and he listened seriously. From a cop's perspective, we can't act on this with just the evidence we have." "I see. I'm sorry I can't be of more help, but remember, I'm always here to lend an ear if you need it." "Yeah, thanks. Just talking about it helps me sort things out." Even after parting ways with my friend, I was still pondering over the photo that Jenny had handed me. No matter how many times I looked at it, the meaning of this photo and my brother's message remained a mystery. What else can I do to find a clue I don't understand from this message alone? I might learn something if I ask Jenny directly, but I feel like my sister-in-law might interfere again. Just then, an idea popped into my head. Maybe I can find something if I look at my brother's belongings. Unable to stay still, I quickly went to my sister-in-law's house. "I'm sorry for bothering you when you're busy. I'm just worried about you and Jenny. Thank you for coming all the way. Jenny is in her room, but let's leave her be for now. She's feeling down since her father passed away." As she said that, she invited me into the living room. She was always tidy and the house was always well kept, but today it felt rather bleak. "Oh, there's nothing of my brothers here, and the family photo that was here the last time I visited." There was nothing to suggest that my brother had been here. Desperate to find anything left behind by my brother, I scanned the room. Maggie brought me some tea and homemade pickles. What caught my eye was a light purple bracelet like a rosary on Maggie's wrist. It didn't seem to match her or my brother's taste, and I felt a sense of discomfort as I thanked her for the tea and tasted the pickles. "Wow, it's so salty. These pickles are really salty, aren't they?" I quickly gulped down my tea to wash down the extreme saltiness of the pickles, but Maggie just tilted her head, saying, "Really? I don't think so." Maggie, a dietitian, made delicious meals that my brother looked forward to so much that he would rush home from work. It was clearly strange for something she made. Could it be that she was feeding my hypertensive brother this salty food? Since I arrived at Maggie's house, I've been feeling an indescribable discomfort. I began to worry about Jenny. "I'd like to talk to Jenny. She's in her room, right?" Just as I stood up and was about to head towards Jenny's room, "No, I won't let you see her." "What? Why?" "I'm sorry, but you should leave. I'm busy preparing for the funeral." Maggie grabbed my wrist, pushed me out into the hallway, and threw me out of the house. Despite visiting the house, I was unable to find any clues. As I looked up at the sky, wondering what to do, Jenny poked her head out of a second-floor window. She put her index finger to her lips in a quiet gesture and threw something at me. It was a small key, wrapped in a cute memo paper. "The key to the shed. Hide it under the potted plant after you use it," the note read. When I silently showed a thumbs up to Jenny, she silently nodded and gently closed the window. I went to the backyard to avoid my sister-in-law and used the key I received to open the shed. Inside, it was packed with my brother's belongings. Among them, I found a diary. Jake was a diligent person and had been recording his daily events in a diary since he lived at home. There was something unbelievable written in there. The seasoning of the food had become heavy, and even when he pointed it out, she said, "Leave it to me, I'm a dietitian," and he couldn't get her to take it seriously. His health had been declining recently. Furthermore, the reason why Jake left that photo was also recorded. I'll never forgive this. The next day, many people, including relatives and Jake's colleagues, gathered at the funeral. When Maggie took the microphone to give the bereavement address, I stood up and stopped her. "I have something I want you all to hear." "Oh, Alice? What's wrong?" Ignoring Maggie, who was surprised by my sudden action, I stepped out in front of the family. Jake's death wasn't an accident. The hall was in an uproar at my words, and Maggie had a very stern look on her face. "What are you talking about? My husband slipped off the scaffold at work and fell." I showed everyone Jake's diary. "Everything is written here. My sister-in-law, who is usually good at cooking, started making heavily seasoned dishes, and Jake's health started to deteriorate. It's strange, isn't it, Maggie, to not only serve salty pickles and soup to Jake, who has high blood pressure every day, but also to insist that he eat everything without leaving any?" "I don't know anything about that. I was careful with his meals every day." Ignoring Maggie, who seemed to be playing innocent, I pulled out another piece of evidence. "This is a photo that Jake left for me. At first, I didn't know what it meant, but when I visited your house yesterday, I understood. The person in this photo is wearing a bracelet that matches the light purple bead bracelet you are wearing." As I pointed to a certain person, Everyone's gaze was instantly drawn there. Mr. Johnson, you and Maggie were having an affair, weren't you? Even though you were a colleague whom Jake trusted the most, why did you do such a thing? As the hall began to stir, Maggie glared at me with a stern expression, and the man looked pale and nervous. Mr. Johnson was a familiar face to me as well. He had been a good friend of Jake's since Jake graduated from high school and started working, and he had visited our house many times. His wrist, wiping the sweat from his forehead, revealed the same bracelet as Maggie's. I'm sure Jake was struggling a lot, knowing that the colleague he trusted was his wife's affair partner, and that he might even be targeted for his life. That's why he couldn't tell me directly, and leaving this photo was all he could do. As I spoke to Mr. Johnson, choking back tears, he broke down crying and held his head. What? A diary and a bracelet can't be evidence of an affair or killing my husband. Maggie started to get defensive. But I was prepared for that, so I continued with the diary. There's more evidence. Jake checked your phone, Maggie, and saw your emails with him. It seems it was written, "Jake is in the way for us to be together. Let's get rid of him somehow." That's a lie. Is it a lie? We can easily find out by investigating, right? At first, it seems you thought of taking advantage of my brother's high blood pressure to kill him through his meals, but that would take too long. So, driven by your desire to get married as soon as possible, you approached Mr. Johnson to eliminate my brother in a workplace accident, didn't you? You planned to push him from a high place on a rainy day, and if anyone asked, you'd just say he slipped. I never said that. He's the one who suggested it. Maggie began to point at Mr. Johnson, trying to shift the blame onto him. The man shook his head frantically, denying it. Mr. Johnson, it was raining on the day my brother died, wasn't it? Mr. Johnson gave a small nod. Normally, work would be stopped on a rainy day, so why wasn't it? It was just a drizzle and we had a deadline, so he suggested we should continue with the work, so I thought it was an opportunity. My brother thought of you as his best friend and trusted you until the end, you know? The moment someone gulped, he bowed deeply towards Jenny, Jake's only daughter. I was led astray by her and I did something terrible. I'm truly sorry. As Mr. Johnson continued to apologize while crying, Jenny looked at him with sad eyes. Maggie was still shouting, I don't know anything about it. I'm not guilty. Even at this point, you'll submit the incriminating emails to the police, right? When Mr. Johnson offered his phone, it seemed she finally gave up. Then, a police officer friend who had come to my brother's funeral arrested the two of them and took them away. It was a relief to see them finally apprehended. After that, Maggie and Mr. Johnson received long prison sentences. Thanks to the lawyer I hired, Jenny was able to receive $100,000 from a system called Victims' Compensation Program, which is designed to help the bereaved families of victims recover a peaceful life as soon as possible. Jenny was in shock from the incident and lost her spirits for a while, but I adopted her as my child and she has started to show more smiles. I decided to pour a lot of love into this child, in place of my brother.
I'm Jessica, turning 32 years old. I've been married to my husband Ronald for 4 years now, and we're currently living with my in-laws. They run a restaurant, and while Ronald works outside, I quit my job to help my in-laws with their business on a daily basis. In fact, it feels like I'm the one running the show most of the time. I'm involved in everything from securing ingredients in the early morning to doing the prep work and serving customers. Working late into the night, my fatigue started to accumulate. But my in-laws never let me rest, and I'm out working almost every day. The regular customers even started to worry about me. One day, my younger brother James announced that he was getting married to his longtime girlfriend Sarah. Although they're still young, they're both mature, and my parents have accepted them. It felt like they were already part of the family, so I was thrilled as if it were my own wedding. The invitation to the wedding is still to come, but they asked me to attend, and of course I told them I would. But there's a problem. It's whether my in-laws will allow it. Since I'm technically an employee, I thought I might have some paid time off, so I decided to negotiate for 3 days off. Excuse me, can I talk to you for a moment? After closing the restaurant and finishing the final check, I approached my relaxed in-laws at home. Ronald, who had just returned from work, was there too. "What's up?" The three of them looked at me as if I was an intruder, and Ronald asked with a big sigh, "This atmosphere is suffocating for me. I have my brother's wedding in 2 months. I'd like to take about 3 days off for it." "Huh? You think you're in a position to take time off?" My mother-in-law glared at me with a devilish look as soon as she heard that I wanted to take a break. Despite feeling intimidated, I mustered up the courage to nod. "I should have some paid time off left, right? I've never used it. I'd like to use it." "So you want to take time off and still get paid? But if I don't, you wouldn't let me take my regular days off if I took time off this month, right?" "How cheeky."
"Let her take time off. It's not a big deal."
The already tense atmosphere seemed to get worse, but then Ronald, my husband, tried to calm my mother-in-law down. I was surprised that my husband took my side, and I looked at him with wide eyes. Then he was grinning at my mother-in-law. Perhaps sensing his mood, my mother-in-law also gave a wry smile, and then she easily agreed. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I was happy to get the time off and felt like jumping for joy on the spot. On the day before the wedding, I prepared to stay at my parents' house for 3 days and left early in the morning. My in-laws and husband were still asleep, so I just left a note saying I was leaving. Then I drove to my parents' house. It's not too far from my in-laws' house to my parents' house. It's about an hour's drive. I was excited to see my parents, whom I hadn't seen in about 4 years. "I'm home!" Having left my in-laws' house early in the morning, I arrived at my parents' home earlier than planned. Even though I knew my parents would be awake, I tried to enter the house as quietly as possible. As soon as I stepped inside, the faint smell of breakfast tickled my nose. "Oh, you're early!" My mother popped her head out from the living room, spotted me, and immediately rushed over. "Yeah, I left there early." I left my suitcase by the entrance, took off my shoes, and stepped further into the house. My mother, clearly delighted, took my hand and led me to the living room. Seeing her face filled me with a warm feeling of truly being home. Upon entering the living room, I found my father already awake, and my younger brother James, sitting at the dining table. As soon as they confirmed my return, both of their faces lit up with joy. After all, it had been 4 years. I was overjoyed to see my family again. After that, the 4 of us gathered around the table and had a long chat. James talked about his girlfriend, what kind of wedding they were planning. Seeing James' love-struck expression while he talked about her made me feel warm inside. I was asked about my in-laws' house, but I felt that it wasn't a happy topic to discuss at such a joyful time, so I deliberately chose not to share anything with my family. The following day, the wedding ceremony took place. James's bride was stunningly beautiful, and the ceremony was so lovely that I was almost moved to tears. After successfully going through the whole day of the wedding ceremony and reception, we returned home. Despite the fun we had, we were quite tired and soon fell asleep. The next day, even though I was supposed to return to my in-laws' house, the joy of meeting my family after such a long time, and the desire to spend more time with my new sister-in-law, made me wish to stay one more day. I knew my in-laws and my husband Ronald wouldn't be okay with this. But it was a time of celebration, and I thought they might let it slide just for one more day. So with the thought of enjoying more family time, I decided to take a chance and call my mother-in-law. To be honest, I was scared. I didn't know what she would say or if she would even agree. I distanced myself from my family to make the call, and for a moment I just stared at the phone, but eventually I dialed her number. After a few rings, I heard my mother-in-law's voice. "Hello? When are you planning on coming back? You better come back soon." The first thing I heard was a clearly irritated voice. Could I stay at my parents' house for just one more day?" Despite feeling uncomfortable with my mother-in-law's words, I timidly asked her. My mother-in-law sighed heavily after hearing my words and went silent for a while. That silence felt unbearably long to me. Just as I was thinking that it was impossible and I should start preparing to return, I heard a snicker from my mother-in-law over the phone.
You really only think about yourself, don't you? You don't have to come back ever again.
What? I was speechless at her unexpected words. Then my mother-in-law, still laughing, said,
Why don't you just divorce Ronald? We don't need a useless daughter-in-law like you. And it seems like Ronald doesn't need you anymore either.
What does that mean? I asked my mother-in-law, unable to understand what she was saying. Laughing, she told me to figure it out myself and hung up the phone. I wondered if she really meant what she said, and as I looked at my disconnected phone, I decided to contact my husband, Ronald.
Hello, what's up?
Judging from Ronald's voice, it seemed nothing unusual had happened. I'm sorry for interrupting your work. I just called your mom and asked if I could stay at my parents' house for one more day.
What did my mom say?
She said I don't have to come back, and she also said we should get a divorce. She said you don't need me anymore. I told Ronald honestly what his mother had said when he asked me. I couldn't believe he would think such a thing. I thought his mother must have said those words lightly out of irritation because I wasn't coming back. However, Ronald fell silent for a while after I spoke and then sighed heavily.
Well, I didn't want to have to say this, but I want to break up with you, Jessica.
What? His unexpected words left me in shock, as if time had stopped. We've been married for 4 years, and it's not like I hadn't felt that our love was gone, but I had put up with Ronald's parents to preserve our life together. Why? I asked, trying to hide my agitation, to know why he felt that way. My hand was trembling, and my heart was pounding. Depending on his reasons, it might be possible to fix things. If there was something wrong with me, I could change. Even if the love was gone, I still wanted to be with Ronald. I prayed from the bottom of my heart that Ronald's words would be something we could fix.
The thing is, there's someone else I like.
Oh, it's over. Anyone would know that hearing the word someone else from Ronald meant our relationship couldn't continue.
Well, that's it then.
Ronald hung up before I could respond. I stood still, unable to do anything, not even cry. What's wrong? After what seemed like a long time, my mother came over with a worried look on her face. When I looked at her, I saw my father peering in from a little behind her. No, it's nothing. The divorce wasn't final, and I didn't think it was appropriate to discuss it on such a happy day, so I tried to put on a smile so my parents wouldn't suspect anything. My mother seemed to sense something was off, but she didn't say anything more. After that, I spent a fun time not thinking about what my mother-in-law or Ronald had said, partly because my brother and his wife had come over. Rather, it felt like I was forcefully putting on a happy facade. My parents, my brother, and his wife all went out, laughed a lot, and talked a lot. I might have been desperately clinging to everyone, not wanting to be alone. My brother and his wife seemed to suspect something was up.
Jessica, are you going back tomorrow?
We all went to a cafe, and while our parents were ordering, my brother and his wife and I sat at a table. Well, I honestly didn't know if I could go back. That's why I couldn't answer right away. Are you okay? You seem to be faking your cheerfulness today.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it?
I knew my younger brother and his wife occasionally gave me worried glances. That's why I can't deny it.
Is something wrong?
My younger brother has always been kind. Whenever I'm feeling down or anxious, he's quick to notice and offer words of comfort. To outsiders, it might seem like he's a big fan of his older sister. Nothing's wrong, I reply, forcing a smile. But James and his wife keep staring at me. I feel uncomfortable under their gaze, as if they could see right through me. What's with the staring contest? At that moment, our parents returned to the table with drinks. Perhaps they find our behavior amusing, as they both wear gentle smiles. Taking this as a cue, James and his wife break their gaze from me, assuring our mother that everything's fine, and the conversation picks up again on a different topic. But the lively atmosphere quickly fades. Suddenly, the ringing of my cell phone emanates from my purse. I pull out my phone, and there on the screen is the name of my mother-in-law. When I don't answer right away, everyone falls silent and turns their attention to me. It's from my mother-in-law. I'll step outside for a bit.
Why not talk here? Why do you need to go outside?
As I attempted to rise from my seat, my mother took hold of my hand, restraining me from standing up. Her face did not reflect the gentle mother I knew, but displayed a stern expression instead. All right. Hello? As soon as I answer the phone, my mother-in-law's laughter rings out.
So, Ronald is divorcing you. That's hilarious.
Let's talk about this when I get back home tomorrow. Due to our close proximity, my mother-in-law's voice can be heard by my parents. I try to tell her that now is not the time to discuss this, but she doesn't seem to want to stop talking.
Good riddance. You've been living your married life blissfully unaware that Ronald was cheating on you. You were never good enough for our family from the start. Oh, I feel so relieved now that you're gone. Ronald said he'll send the divorce papers. So don't bother coming back. We'll send your things later.
With that, she hangs up. Cheating? I froze on the spot, phone in hand. I was shocked when I heard he had someone else, but to learn that he was cheating on me? It's devastating. What was the point of all the time I spent trying to please my in-laws and my husband? As I ponder this, I can't stop the tears from flowing.
Jessica.
My parents and James's couple probably heard everything. My mother-in-law's voice is too loud, so even at the lowest volume, anyone close by can hear her. I can't make any excuses or show a smile, so I just look down.
What just happened?
My father's quiet, low voice echoes. As I try to hold back my flowing tears, my mother hands me a handkerchief. I accept it and press it to my eyes, the faint scent of my mother's perfume reaching my nose, further stirring my emotions and causing my tears to flow even more.
I thought I heard something about cheating.
I can tell the atmosphere has instantly frozen over. I don't dare look at their faces, but I can imagine their expressions of shock. The day after my younger brother and his wife got married, his older sister announced her divorce. I'm sure everyone was stunned. As I was thinking about this, I felt a warm hand placed on my head. Slowly lifting my face, I followed the edge to see my mother, her expression teetering on the edge of tears, looking at me. Don't cry. You've done well. You haven't been home for 4 years. After this, she shared everything she knew with me. Apparently, she had been worried about me not coming home once since my marriage. She had called my in-laws, asked her friends to visit my in-laws' store to gather information. She had heard about how I was severely worn out, and how the customers secretly talked about how my in-laws were treating me. During her calls, she was told harsh things like, "She's not here right now," or "Your daughter's incompetent." When my mother told my father about how I was being treated, he also seemed to have considered bringing me back home once, but they decided to wait until I asked for help. I had no idea my parents knew everything. I was so embarrassed. I couldn't even look at them.
What awful treatment. What's that about?
My brother's wife, hearing the story from my mother, was quietly angry. Her face flushed red.
I thought you looked worn out. But so that's what it was about, Jessica. You don't need to go back there. Let's get some alimony and split.
That's right. No more crying.
But just getting the alimony and leaving feels wrong, right? We need to make them understand how much Jessica suffered there.
Upon saying this, my sister-in-law showed a defiant smile. When I apologized, saying I didn't need to do anything, and that I was sorry for the situation, my brother told me that I didn't have to apologize, and that he was furious about how I was treated. For some reason, they both left, saying they could handle it. I stood there, dumbfounded by the whirlwind departure of James and his wife. My parents gave me a wry smile and warmly welcomed me to live at home. Several days later, an envelope addressed to me arrived from my in-laws. It contained divorce papers, already signed by my husband. Feeling a sense of sadness, I signed them and submitted them to the city hall the next day. With that, I became officially divorced and single, but an unexpected event occurred the following month. I was looking for a job near my parents' home, but was having difficulty finding one. As I was pondering what to do, my phone rang. The call was from my ex-husband, and when I answered, he seemed very angry.
Hey, what the hell have you done?
This was the first thing my ex-husband Ronald bellowed when I picked up the call. Before I could figure out what he meant, he shouted again.
Since we got divorced, not a single customer has come to my parents' shop. Suppliers are saying they want to end their contracts. It's your fault. My parents are struggling because of you.
I had no clue what he was talking about. I couldn't think of anything I had done to cause this. What are you talking about? I haven't done anything.
Don't lie. Who else could it be but you?
No matter how hard I insisted it wasn't me, he wouldn't listen. He even said, if we couldn't resolve this over the phone, he was going to come over with his parents. I pleaded with him not to come, but he told me to prepare myself and hung up. I rushed to my mother and explained the situation. She seemed calm and started making a call. I was getting frustrated at her nonchalance, not knowing what to do. It was just my mother and me at home. I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to her. I had to protect her. I went to the kitchen to look for something that could be used as a weapon, but my mother stopped me. "It's all right," she said, and suggested we calmly wait for Ronald and his parents as she started preparing tea. A few hours later, Ronald and his parents arrived at our house. All three of them were quite angry, glaring at me with intensity.
Don't mess around.
Without a greeting, my ex-husband Ronald tried to lunge at me, but my father-in-law held him back.
I apologize for our sudden visit.
My father-in-law gave a polite nod to my mother. In response, she smiled warmly and invited them into the living room. I was terrified to let those people into our home, but I felt like I had no choice but to trust my mother. She served tea to everyone, and despite their continued glares, she asked my in-laws and Ronald to wait a little longer. A silence fell over the five of us. What felt like hours were probably only a few minutes. Not knowing what my mother was thinking made me anxious. Just then, the sound of the intercom echoed through the house, and before my mother could answer, the front door opened and someone walked in. When I turned to look, the door swung open with force, and there stood my younger brother and his wife, both with stern expressions. Ronald and my in-laws were taken aback by their sudden appearance, completely clueless about what was going to happen. I was just as confused, not knowing what to expect.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
My brother, wearing a suit, took a deep breath and sat next to me, followed by his wife.
What's this? Bringing out your little brother?
Ronald snorted dismissively, shooting a condescending glance at my brother.
My mother informed me of your visit, so I hurriedly prepared for this. You wouldn't believe how long I've been waiting for this moment.
With that, my brother placed an envelope on the table and started pulling out several documents, among which were some photographs. Curious, I peered over and saw the topmost paper labeled Investigation Report.
Ronald, you've been having an affair, haven't you?
At my brother's words, Ronald's eyes widened in shock. But my brother didn't stop there. He had apparently gathered evidence of Ronald's infidelity.
We have all the proof we need. We've also obtained testimony from the woman you cheated with. Therefore, on the grounds of adultery, we will be seeking damages.
At my brother's words, everyone but my mother and my brother's wife, including me, wore surprised expressions.
What are you talking about? We're already divorced. Aren't you aware? Even after a divorce, if evidence of adultery committed during the marriage is found, damages can be claimed.
With a smirk, My brother left Ronald speechless.
Enough of this. We're here to discuss what this woman has done. She's disrupting our business. She must have spread false rumors to our clients.
Unable to hold back any longer, my mother-in-law stood up, pointing at me and shouting, with such force that I had to back away. I will address that matter. My sister-in-law, as if she had been waiting for her turn, started to speak with a smile. I apologize for the late introduction. My maiden name is Sarah Brown. My father is the owner of Brown's Diner. In fact, although Sarah was not the heir because she married my brother, her father was a top business owner of a well-known restaurant chain in the U.S. recognized by many corporations. In other words, she was a CEO's daughter.
What did you say?
The first to react to Sarah's introduction was my father-in-law. Turning towards me, he blanched and shouted,
Why didn't you tell us?
Was there a need to tell you? Upon hearing my response, my father-in-law seemed to crumble on the spot. However, my mother-in-law was still in the dark, continuing to glare at me.
What's this Brown business?
Oh dear, for a business owner not to recognize the name, that's unfortunate. Sarah cast a pitiful glance at my mother-in-law, who was now turning a darker shade of red.
What's going on here?
Asked to explain, I had no choice but to answer. I owe a lot to Sarah's father. He introduced me to suppliers and taught me how to manage the business. Without him, I wouldn't be able to survive in the restaurant industry. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law finally seemed to understand and sat down drained of all of her energy. I've done some research. It seems that you, Jessica, were the one managing the business all this time. The good reputation with customers, all thanks to you. Even the suppliers were willing to work with us because of you. Without you, they see no reason to continue. Sarah continued to speak, grinning from ear to ear. According to her, just days after I stopped coming in, our regular customers said there was no point in coming if I wasn't there, and they stopped showing up. The same went for the suppliers. They had been willing to work with us because I was there, but they didn't want to deal with my in-laws' restaurant without me, and so they withdrew. Sarah's father found out about all this, and with Sarah's appeal, decided not to help anymore. In other words, my in-laws' restaurant was abandoned by everyone, customer and industry peers alike. If only you had appreciated Jessica, none of this would have happened. Sarah's face was full of joy as she chuckled to herself. I shuddered at the thought of what happens when you anger Sarah. My in-laws were speechless, but my ex-husband wasn't ready to give up. He continued to shake as he looked over the documents, and then threw them on the floor and turned to me.
This is all your fault,
he shouted, attempting to strike me, but my brother stepped in.
Are you still not done?
To my ex-husband, who had clearly lost his mind, my brother had a stern look on his face as he calmly said,
I won't forgive you for cheating and treating my sister so poorly.
With that, my ex-husband laughed derisively.
What can you do? Have you forgotten? I was your brother-in-law, even if only for a short time.
With that, my brother took out a business card he had hidden in his breast pocket and showed it to my ex-husband. The card indicated that my brother was a lawyer. He was affiliated with a well-known law firm, usually dealing with criminal cases, but occasionally he would represent people troubled by issues like infidelity. Seeing the card, my ex-husband realized he had lost and quietly sat down. I think we're done here. Please leave. My mother spoke to my exhausted in-laws and ex-husband, standing them up and ushering them out of the house. Then she said to me, Well done. Later, I found out from a friendly local restaurant owner, who had been kind to me during my marriage to my ex-husband, that my in-laws were unable to continue running their restaurant and had to shut down almost immediately. My ex-husband had been exposed for his infidelity at work. His reputation had fallen, and he had been forced to resign in disgrace. They moved away after that, so I don't know the full details, but they said it's likely going to be a tough life from now on. I was able to receive alimony from both my ex-husband and his affair partner, which I gave to James and my parents as a token of my gratitude. At first, they refused, but when I insisted, saying it's all I could offer, they reluctantly accepted. After that, I was able to find a job and have been spending happy times living with my parents. I owe it all to my family. I am truly grateful. I don't know how long it will take, but I plan to return the favor to my parents, James, and his wife in due time.